Hello, and welcome to A Journeyman's Travels, where we have been talking through the effective executive. I'm your host, Daniel Scheifler, Principal Consultant with Improving. Welcome. Now, last time, we had rounded out our discussion on the elements of effective decision-making, a two-parter, and Drucker calls on the effective executive to, get to know the real problem, identify right solutions before ever considering how to sell it to the organization. And then he walks us through how to create the action plan, communicate it effectively, building in the feedback so that the organization can sense the results of that decision. So it might seem that this next chapter, called Effective Decisions, would simply be a rehash, right? No. Instead, Drucker turns our focus towards building the systems that we will need to accomplish any of those elements that he's already identified for us. And it starts with how the organization will sense the results. That is, it starts with identifying what we need to look for. Now, most decisions at the moment that we're trying to make them are neither provably right nor provably wrong. That proof really emerges from the results of the decision itself, which means that we can never know a priori whether it was the right one or the wrong one. We could collect all the statistics we want, but the narrative emerges as the result of the decision. Now, ideally, we'd be starting with facts. Only that no man has all the facts, so practically we're starting with opinions. That is, our thoughts about the facts and how they go together in the story they're telling lead us to what decision we might want to lean towards. And so we have to figure out what's really a fact versus just an opinion that we think is right. And so to do that, we have to test those facts, right? These opinions are really just hypotheses in need of testing. What is the criteria of relevance then, right? And what should we measure specifically? That's the critical aspect, right? How do we pick what we will measure? And that whole age-old wisdom, be careful what you measure, you just might get it. That's the critical challenge. And Drucker kind of calls out here that decision-making is not the emerging from a consensus of the facts. For those are all about the present and the past. The decision is about the future. Decision-making is a judgment call after careful consideration of real alternatives about what those facts indicate to us. Only that, again, we're not starting with facts, we're starting with opinions and hypotheses. And so it's the emergence of our anticipation about the future based upon what we know about the past and the patterns we've seen, and what we think we are seeing emerge from the current facts. Realizing that we're starting with opinions, and that we have to end with a judgment based upon the patterns that emerge, dramatically affects us here. Right? For someone proposing any option for a decision, Drucker challenges them to think of the experiment they'd need to prove their hypothesis. Right? What do we need to know to test whether or not this hypothesis is valid? Once we define what factual findings can be expected and what we should be looking for, now we're at a critical question, right? This is the focus on the metrics, the measures, because some decisions mean changing the structure of the organization or moving someone's cheese, right? They used to win by scoring sales with X. Now they have to go do something else. They're not going to be happy about this. The metrics are critical to the success of any change. Because if you can change the metrics, you can change the future. Considering the following, right? You and me, we're on a car trip, and we're measuring success by measuring how fast we're going, which of course means we want to be on the highway the whole way through, maybe the Autobahn if we can get there. But just because my velocity is increasing, does it mean I'm really accomplishing what we wanted? After all, we're on a trip. That implies there's a destination. Am I going the right direction? I don't know. I wasn't measuring the distance to the destination. I was just measuring how fast I could go. And as it turns out, the least blocked road right now in traffic is going the wrong way. Oh, nuts. Control the metrics, you control the narrative. If I was only looking at velocity and I saw that going up, I'd be excited, except that I don't know if that velocity is going the right direction. Whereas if I was measuring the distance to the destination, I would have questions immediately when I realized I turned down the wrong road. And that has some pretty big implications for any of the transformations you may have seen going on in business. If controlling the metrics means controlling the narrative, it means that for any transformation to really take root, we must institute new metrics of performance. If we don't, the old metrics will continue to encourage the old behaviors, and the old actions that we were trying to move away from are just going to keep happening. Because if I measure someone on their ability to accomplish X, and X is not aligned with the new transformation, there's every chance they're going to burn down the org to accomplish X. Be careful what you measure. You just might get it. Critically, the traditional measures, the ones we've inherited, reflect the decisions we made yesterday, what we thought was important yesterday and would indicate success yesterday. If there's a need for a decision, it almost certainly indicates that the measurements we're using are no longer effective, because if they were, we wouldn't have this problem, or it would be obvious what we should do based upon the metrics we have. So any real, meaningful decision means we need new metrics. And so the question becomes, how do I select the right metrics? This, again, is going to be a risk-taking judgment, not a mathematical exercise, right? We don't have facts to be provably right or provably wrong, but it has to be a judgment call based upon experience, what we're seeing. And as a judgment call, there have to be real alternatives for us to make a judgment call against, right? It's not just, do I want to keep this metric or not? Or do I want to use that metric or not? Because that just won't work. There should be a set from which you can select. And critically here, you have to be careful. Just because you select a successful metric doesn't mean that your company's suddenly going to be successful. If I take an easy example one, right? I want stuff flowing through my system, so I'd pick throughput. Well, it's pretty easy to get throughput for stuff if you just start slamming more and more work in progress, right? I'm just going to have all the machines run all the time. But anyone who hears that immediately knows, wait a minute, that doesn't mean that my company's being successful. It means I'm burning a lot of capital to build up inventory. And so my inventory will go up and up and up and up, just like my throughput went up and up and up and up. But I want my inventory to go down, down, down to a certain level, because I want to be selling that. And so if I don't measure both throughput and inventory, thank you, sir, theory of constraints, I'm in trouble. For every success metric you define, please send it out there with a balancing metric, because a man with a metric in hand may burn down the company trying to achieve that without recognizing that he's causing a problem. And kind of paired with that, remember that people realistically only have room in their head for a handful of things. 5, give or take 2. So please, don't institute a measure where you got 8 different metrics to measure someone on. You'll confuse them. Instead, select a handful of the potent, really meaningful, actionable metrics for what you're trying to measure. And of course, this oddly brings us to an important point, where this judgment call about different metrics brings us the first rule of decision-making. And the first rule of decision-making is not, you don't talk about decision-making. The first rule is, don't make decisions without disagreement. Wait, disagreement? Aren't we supposed to be building collaborative agreement via building effective teams? Yes and no. If you're only getting yes, sir, are you getting agreement and commitment or just compliance? You can't tell. And most likely it means that people aren't actively engaged with the important decision, or that you're not engaging with an important decision at all. Effective decisions are about judgment, not merely consensus. And so if no one has a differing opinion, we are definitely missing details. So Drucker goes so far as to say, if there is no disagreement, go make it. In fact, he then anecdotally adds that basically every effective president we've had has had some way of producing this kind of effective disagreement. And I read about an example for this out of Eisenhower's cabinet, from books that he'd had written about him and had real experience of what he had done. For example, he would insist on having every military decision weighed in on by the civilian leaders, and vice versa. Now, that might sound a little silly, right? The civilian leaders are weighing in on military decisions? They have no experience in this. Yes. But because they have no experience, the military leaders can't get away with just shouting jargon at them. They have to explain. And critically, these weren't just like win-lose political points arguments, and they never devolved into character attacks. Rather, the entire cabinet had a very disciplined approach to these arguments built on listening for mutual understanding and seeking the truth of the matter. They wanted to understand, right? The military had to explain why this exchange of money made sense for the results. The civilian leaders had to do the same thing without relying on their jargon. They had to truly explain and build understanding of people who didn't share their views. This basic principle, seeking first to understand, underpins a lot of effective decision-making, even in your personal life. You can see the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's one of the first principles, seek first to understand. And so this builds us to critical points we need for disagreement. We have to understand the alternatives before we could ever make a real decision. Because until then, it's just asking, hey, would you like, cheese on that? That's not a real life or death decision. It's not going to make much difference in the long run. It's just a choice. Decisions are the ones that are going to change where we go in the future. And so in discussing this, Drucker brings up an odd question to go last. One that we definitely haven't asked yet, which is, does this decision need to be made at all? What? A whole lot of work will have just gone into determining the information we need to make this decision, whether the approach we'd use is this, what metrics we might choose between. So wouldn't it seem like asking that at the end is kind of a waste? No, actually. Asking this question at the end helps us evaluate something very important, and it's the cost and the risk of the change versus the cost of not doing anything at all. And what's more is we couldn't ask this question and effectively answer it until the very end, because until we had done that thinking and engaging with the problem, we didn't understand the problem to be faced, nor the choices we could make. Therefore, neither the cost nor the risk of inaction. Drucker states that every decision is like a surgery. There's a ton of risk and cost with each decision that's actually worth making. So we arrive then at this general decision-making rule. Only act if the balance of the benefits greatly favors what you want to do, above the cost and the risk. Act only if the balance of benefits greatly outweighs the cost and risk. And then, like to it, is this. Either act or do not. There is no try. Do or do not. Thank you, Yoda. But whatever you do, don't hedge or compromise. You are making a decision. You are making a surgery. Don't jump in and halfway remove the appendix. Remove it all or don't do anything. First, do no harm. Every decision is like surgery, and we have to consider it diligently and deeply to know if it's the right decision to make. We need to really think, because sometimes changing now is the wrong choice, even if it looks like the world's going to heck. Sometimes waiting is the right option. Drucker's ability to render simple, even complex questions like, should I make this decision or not, never ceases to amaze. Nor does he shy away from just how important effective decision-making is to an organization. He walks us through the kinds of systems and thoughts we'll need to be able to have in order to prepare for a decision, right? We have to recognize that we're starting with options, and so our decisions have to be tested to see if they align with the facts and stay aligned with the facts, because stuff changes as you make decisions. That means intentional hypothesis design and experimentation, and that if we're going to change the organization, we have to change what we're measuring to A, inform whether the hypothesis was correct, and B, to change the reward for actions. If we don't change what we measure, yesterday's actions will come back. Further, no good decision can be made without disagreement. As iron sharpens iron, the investigation and consideration of real alternatives is what produces the best results. But these arguments have to remain disciplined, truth-seeking collaborations, not devolving into interpersonal attacks or someone seeking to win. This has to be what's good for the company and what is rooted in truth and provable fact. And that is no mean feat for sure. In fact, it is calling your teams to a deeper level of collaboration than they've already been trying to achieve. And in the end, making a decision may still not be the right thing to do. And so Drucker reminds us quite pithily that executives are not paid for doing things they like. They are paid to do the right things. True and effective decisions require judgment, courage, and discipline. We should only act if the benefits greatly outweigh the risk of inaction. And when we act. Don't hedge. Let there be no wiffle-waffling on what you wish to do. If you see that this is necessary, go through with it courageously and build the support along the way. Darn the torpedoes and full speed ahead. So this brings me then to the challenge question that I have to leave you with. How much debate did your last decision get? Looking forward, how might you subject your next decision to the kind of rigor that Drucker is suggesting? Thank you for joining me in this brief episode on effective decisions, my fellow journeyman. I wish you safe travels.